Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation. And viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, tribal leaders gather in search of answers and solutions to the latest surge of COVID cases in their communities.
I'm not gonna lie, it's been the hardest time to be a tribal leader right now. My hat's off. Hearing all the tribal leaders these last few days, my hat's off to all of them. My heart's with them.
Plus, the benefits and strategies behind decolonizing your diet this holiday season. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. We want to wish you and your families a safe and socially distanced holiday weekend. We appreciate you spending a little bit of it with us here at New Mexico in Focus. November is Native American Heritage Month, and we are dedicating our show this week to stories of our indigenous communities and the issues they face. That includes the resurgence of COVID-19, which is, of course, continuing to create massive health and economic challenges. We will also look back at a terrific story we did last year on the reasons why we should all embrace the idea of decolonizing our diets. And that's just in time for your holiday feasting season. We also want to share with you some of our favorite videos from last year, readings from the first ever Native American National Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo, who went to school at the Institute of American Indian Arts right here in Santa Fe. We'll begin right there with a timely poem coming out of the 2020 election. It's called For Those Who Would Govern.
I wrote this little piece. I don't know if it's really a poem. It's called For Those Who Would Govern. Haven't you ever wondered why there's no, what are the qualifications to be a leader? And other than having enough money. And it seems like, because I watch certainly national, local, state politics, tribal politics, we're all human beings. And it seems like there should be, do you know history? Do you know the laws of your, do you love the people? What is your intent? So I wrote this, it's in a book of poetry, but I have history and all sorts of things in here. But it's for those who would govern. First question, can you first govern yourself? Second question, what is the state of your own household? Third question, do you have a proven record of community service and compassionate acts? Fourth question, do you know the history and laws of your principalities? Fifth question, do you follow sound principles? Do you look for fresh vision to lift all the inhabitants of the land, including animals, plants, elements, all who share this earth? Sixth question, are you owned by lawyers, bankers, insurance agents, lobbyists, or other politicians, anyone else who would unfairly profit by your decisions? Seventh question, do you have authority by the original keepers of the lands, those who obey natural law and are in the service of the lands on which you stand?
New Mexico is back under a shelter-in-place order, of course, due to the alarming surge in COVID-19 cases over the last month or so. And there's no telling just how long it will last, as leaders work to keep health care systems from collapsing under the weight of patients' needs. Tribal leaders across New Mexico are also struggling to keep their communities safe, healthy, and vibrant. Last week, leaders from all 23 of the state's tribal nations held a leadership summit, online of course, a dialogue in which they've partnered with the state for 17 years since the Indian Affairs Department became a cabinet-level agency. Correspondent Antonio Gonzalez was able to talk this month to two leaders about upholding sovereignty and working to keep their citizens safe, and to talk to Indian Affairs Secretary Lynn Trujillo about the challenges ahead of New Mexico's Native communities as COVID cases continue to climb.
Welcome to New Mexico in Focus, Secretary Lynn Trujillo, Governor Brian Bayo, and President Gabe Aguilar. Welcome.
Hello.
Secretary Trujillo, tribal communities have been hit hard by COVID-19. Early on in the pandemic, there was a lack of PPE, resources, funding to address the virus in tribal communities. What did you hear during the Tribal Summit from tribal leaders of their most pressing need right now when it comes to COVID-19?
Well, thanks, Antonia, for the invitation. Good to see you, Governor Vayo, President Aguilar. We heard a lot from our tribal leaders. We actually devoted a large part of the morning for the session to hear directly from leaders about the impacts of COVID on their community, some of their priorities. We heard a lot about the ongoing support and need for food and water, increased testing, a lot of interest in what's going to happen when the COVID vaccine becomes available and what that's going to look like, and the partnership that needs to occur not only between the states and not only between the state and the tribes, but also the Indian Health Service and how we can better collaborate. We also heard a lot about economic recovery. What are we going to do as our tribes are feeling the impacts from the closures of many of their enterprises? And as we all know, tribes rely on their enterprises to help take care of their native citizens and their governmental functions. And we also heard about education and the importance of education, but also what COVID has kind of laid on bare during this time, and how do we continue to educate our kids during the pandemic.
And Governor Vayo, Secretary Trujillo mentioned healthcare and, of course, the Indian Health Service. And the Indian Health Service on Acoma lands is no longer offering emergency services or critical care as a redesign takes place. It seems like it's a repercussion of contracting and compacting, but the Indian Health Service still has a responsibility to the people of Acoma. And you've called on the IHS for immediate resolution, also members of Congress for relief and funding. Governor Vayo, what role do you see the state taking in the hospital issue at Acoma?
Thank you and good afternoon. So, we have been working this issue now for a while, and we have reached out directly. I've reached out to Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, and really grateful for her willingness and shared concern regarding this issue at ACL Hospital. And so we are working directly with the governor at this point. The governor is in contact with the Indian Health Services headquarters in Washington, D.C., and so we are working together and going to join forces here to see what opportunities there are to harness some available funding through Indian Health Services, while also advocating at a higher level within the congressional delegation and potential emergency appropriations for this service unit. This time of COVID and this time of surge in cases really just elevates this dire concern here at the Pueblo, not only for Acoma, but the neighboring communities who are users of this facility.
And Secretary Trujillo, is there anything you can add to the facility there at Acoma, the healthcare facility?
No, only that, I know that our Governor Lujan Grisham, as Governor Vayo indicated, they've been in touch and in support. The state has stepped in all along the way, I think early on for testing to help out with that. And we currently do through the Department of Health to assist in testing. We look forward to working with the Pueblo to help make sure that their citizens are vaccinated as the vaccine rolls out. So, really at this time, it's really dismaying to see what has happened in relation to the impacts and the closure of this facility, especially in light of where we're at with the pandemic, when we should actually be seeing increase actually to our tribal communities for their healthcare services and their needs.
And President Aguilar, your community is also dealing with a lot of COVID-19 issues. You've ordered lockdowns for your community early on, established isolation units, and a number of other measures to address COVID-19. Seems like it's a really tough time right now as a tribal leader to make these tough decisions. President Aguilar, can you describe a little bit about the impacts economically when it comes to gaming and other ventures? How has the tribe handled that during the pandemic?
To be honest with you, Antonia, it's been very tough. It's been very hard on the tribe. Working with the governor, we didn't have to shut down, because of our tribal sovereignty, but we thought about being great partners with the state, and we took that first step to shut down, and we actually shut down twice already. One thing of being shut down, we were shut down about 6 months. You know, we hit a huge loss in revenue. And I'm thankful for the CRF funding that came in from Washington, D.C., but a lot of those relief monies were not able to use for lost revenue. So we couldn't use those money towards the casinos. So we had to use it just for COVID and anything that relates to COVID. So we had to get really creative on how to help our people. And, you know, and another thing is we applied for these municipal loans, the Main Street loans in Washington. A lot of casinos, we have over 500 employees. So we didn't qualify, you know, so there's a lot of things that hurt Indian country, I believe. And, you know, we were in the middle of refinancing our casino. You know, it just happened to be around COVID time, and we were 2 weeks away from signing in March. We're going to sign around April 14th, but we closed. So the banks pulled back, the bondholders pulled back, and they told us you have to be open so many days before we can do business with you. So we reopened in July, and we've been trying to push right now because, you know, we're crunched for time. Also, where our tribe, if we don't get a deal, you know, we'll fall into default. You know, and next year I don't want to be fighting legal battles, you know, and fighting, you know, to try to keep our casino open, because that's the way it's going right now. Is that you know, COVID really hit us so hard that people just don't understand. You know, I mean, if we were if the deal wasn't due to next year, we would close the whole time, you know. But as of right now, I was saying, the banks and the bondholders are telling us if you close, that pretty much it's off the table, which is kind of, it's tough because you look at public safety and then you look at the health of your people. You know, our tribal casino, it funds the tribal government operations, fire and rescue, conservation, parks and rec, you know, anybody that does maintenance, housing, everything's funded from the casino. So, but, you know, if we don't stay open, we don't live, you know, and we've had to step into our reserves, you know, but, you know, I'm telling you, this has been many sleepless nights thinking of ways, how can I help my people? And I think 60% of my casino is still furloughed. You know, out of 1,300 employees, I was looking at the numbers, we might have about 450 working right now, you know, and it's really tough. I'm not gonna lie. It's been the hardest time to be a tribal leader right now. My hat's off. Hearing all the tribal leaders these last few days, my hat's off to all of them. My heart's with them, because one of my good friends says, I'm getting out of leadership because COVID was too hard for us. I mean, it really, mentally, anxiety, everything. I'll tell you guys a little input about me right now. I'm trying to run the tribe. My sister and mom are both positive right now. So I'm trying to stay positive for them. I haven't seen them, you know, for a few weeks, but I check on them and call them. And I went and dropped food off in their driveway and drove off. But I mean, I have about 7 family members that are positive, and I'm trying to stay positive, but I don't tell my community that, because it's really hard, because I got to stay strong for my community and push through. So, but it has been a tough year financially and every which way. So.
And I'm very sorry to hear about that. Definitely COVID-19 is touching all of us. Governor Vayo, can you expand a little bit on that, or any message that you're trying to share with your people as a leader? I've seen some of your video messages online.
Thank you. Well, you know, one of the things that we wanted to ensure that we were doing during this time is to maintain communication with our community and to provide them with as much information and education about COVID and this pandemic, all very new to each and every one of us. And in the very initial term of the pandemic, we were very concerned because we had limited access to information, as did the rest of the world and other places throughout the United States. But, you know, we do have concepts in our own Acoma oral history that talk about these times, that talk about pandemic, or what we call hiatsumi in our language, that these are events that were prophesized, and that at some time in the future we might experience something like this, and our ancestors have in history. So, you know, we've really done all that we can to mobilize internally so that we have those strong lines of communication with our community. We've mobilized the day that the first case arrived in New Mexico. We issued a declaration of a state of emergency. We established our health command. We closed the Pueblo, and we've been closed since. And a week later, we closed all of our tribal enterprises. And only until about 2 weeks ago did our travel centers open back up at 50%. But during this time, we've tried to also assure our community that we want to help them out, because we know that it's such a strain on all of them and all of us financially, emotionally, not being able to be true Akamas in this time of great danger, when we can't practice our own culture, is just a significant detriment to us. And so, we've been closed, as I said, since March. Our tribal casino has been closed, but we've been paying all of our employees, both on the tribal side and on our business side. We just unfortunately, very unfortunate that we had to conduct our first layoff last week. So it's a tough time, and we have more work to do. And as we think about the recovery, there are so many things that we need to take into consideration, and it's going to take communication. It will take understanding, a collective understanding. And I think if we have that internally within the community, it really helps us. And we're seeing that right now, the results of that communication and education, because it shows in our numbers, but it also is reflected in the way in which our tribal members respond to all of the restrictions that we've placed upon them.
And definitely Indigenous communities across New Mexico and across the United States are resilient. And we keep hearing about different tribes and different leaders relying on culture, history, language to get through, and community, even if that's virtually, to get through these tough times. I want to thank you all for joining us here today on New Mexico in Focus on New Mexico PBS. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another Indian school poem. And this is in honor of the women. And at IAIA, at least back then, we used there were all these military terms like details and restriction. And restriction is what happened is if you were caught with an infraction, like speaking, and IAIA was considered pretty progressive, yet you were still not allowed to speak your native language, and or drink. And if you were caught with any of that on the weekends, you were put on restriction, and you couldn't. You had to stay in the dorm. But every Friday, but people always felt sorry for you on restriction and would bring you things anyway. And that was usually where the party was happening, is in the area of restriction. But there were so many stories. I mean, that's what gets me, is the story of who Indians are in America is nothing. It's like a thin line of stereotypes. And yet we have such rich personal, family, tribal stories they're amazing. So this is about one night on restriction. This is a fictional character who's speaking. Indian School Night Song Blues. I called to order the meeting of the girls on restriction at Indian School, locked up in the dorm. We broke the rules. Now it's Saturday night. No booze, you lose. Music courtesy of KOMA, straight from Oklahoma City. Across the plains of tears and fears and over the mountains to hear the city different. Indian School, hippie crash. Let's dance. Where's the dorm matron? Hide the stash. We all admire Marlene. She's one of the best. She's Jackson Pollock in a dress. She only leaves the painting studio for sleep or work, and on Sunday she sneaks out to the Indian hospital on the other side of campus. She took me once. The children clapped and laughed when she came in. She brought them gifts, all her desserts saved up for a week. Crayons, paper, tiny fans. We hid when the staff came in. They eventually threw her out. The hospital carried no insurance to cover the harm she might do. And Venus, now that's a name and a history. One parent from the north on the back of a horse, the other from the south over the back of a river. Venus is a singer, a real singer. Each singer has a particular gift. Some grow plants, some call helpers, some heal the sick, some make the dead rise up and dance. When Venus sings, we enter into a trance. We no longer hurt from freak chants. You're going to make it to Broadway, either New York or Albuquerque. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, you're as silent as a mouse in the corner of the dining hall, chewing on stale American bread. We don't know who you are or where you've been. Maybe you're dead to this reality. None of us are coping well with the BIA. We've read the reports. Doesn't play well with others. Won't speak or look us in the eye. Talks to ghosts. We hear what they're really saying. We have the guns and money, and we have your children. Mary's spirit is mostly underground with clay. When she's with us, she roams the hall in precise eyeglasses, bell-bottoms laced tight, and a stack of poetry in her arms. T.S. Eliot, she says, needed to put his hands in clay. She reads him every day, perched with her books outside the powwow circle. Where's Kip? We can't find her anywhere. She's not in the laundry room practicing powwow in her underwear. She's not on the roof where she sneaks her smokes. She's not in the tent she made of government-issued bedspreads where she sketches high fashion of Indians in Paris. Here comes Kit with a knife. And there she goes, no top or bottom, only fury whirling in a spiritual nudity. She's headed out into the snow. She's what happens when somebody hurts the baby. We can corner our sheets so a quarter spins and know the drill for shots, debugging, and towels. We have a chance.
Food. It's on the minds and stomachs of most of us this holiday weekend. And part of the celebration of the season has to do with sharing and eating those coveted family recipes, and especially those specialty dishes. But as we dive into the holidays, we want to pause to consider where our food comes from and the health benefits of what's fueling our bodies. A movement here in New Mexico and across the country is striving for sustainability and healthy foods, especially in Native American communities. This week, we revisit a trip to Jemez Pueblo, where NMIF correspondent Antonia Gonzalez got the chance to cook and talk with a Native woman business owner whose mission is to decolonize diets.
When I say decolonize diets, I think of the impacts that the standard American diet has on my community's health. So when I say decolonize, I kind of am referring to stepping away from the standard American diet, and that includes right now, sadly, a lot of fast food, highly processed food. That's what I kind of would like people to step away from, and also kind of return to more foods that are just more natural, more from the earth, and even better, more native and locally sourced.
How did your journey into this start?
Little by little, I just, first I said no more fast food, no more beef, no more chicken, no more food that comes from the commercialized meat industry or dairy industry. And so once I let go of that, little by little, it just kind of I started to feel better and better, and away went the depression, and I just got happier about life, and I realized, like, wow, this is this is real. Food is medicine is real, and it's a way I felt empowered. And from then I just started making better and better choices about my life's course. And that's how it all got started.
What are some of the misperceptions you hear about plant-based diets?
I think a misperception is that people think that we as Native people just survived off meat alone. And then I get this one a lot about organic. There's a big misperception about that, and people attach that to maybe wealthy people, and they associate that with class or a certain group of people, knowing, that most of the food we have, vegetables and fruit-wise, are all from the Americas. And we were cultivators, we were agriculturalists as Pueblo people. We had all this food around us, plant-based food, and that was a big source of sustenance for Native people. So that's a big misconception. And then also that you need meat for protein, or you're going to be lacking in vitamins. So that's a big, big misconception, when in fact, animals get all their nutrients from plants themselves. So in a sense, we're just cutting out the middleman and going directly to plants. I think a benefit of going back to just plant foodways and native foodways is just that it's a cleaner way of living, cleaner way of eating, and that's the biggest part. I would say, to me, it's about health, and it's also about the impact on the environment. So a lot of earth ethics, and the benefits are just enormous, from health to, from individual well-being to community well-being, healing, everything for the earth, water. The way we eat now, the standard American diet, is not sustainable for the earth. So it's just like it's going nowhere, and we have to decide if we really want to take steps in our own lives to make changes for the betterment of the world, really.
Share some of the ways you are helping people access more healthy foods.
I started my business, Itality, and it originally started with grab-and-go food. So I approached the Walato convenience store in my community and asked them, can I stock your fridge with healthy foods? And they were open to it. I was locally sourcing from local native farmers. So it was just a win-win all over. So from there, I just started making salads, fruit salads, simple vegetable stir fries, and delivering them to the gas station. It's been a year of that, and it's doing pretty well. It's in high demand. I try to be at pop-up event. I like to focus on native-centered, indigenous-centered events. I'm going to try to be at more feast days and just try to be that option for people where there's no options, because we're completely in a food desert times 10, and people need just the option and the inspiration. I think even being a source of inspiration for children who see it in their community and maybe have never seen, fresh juice being sold on feast day or something like that. So I just try to be wherever I can.
You talked a little bit about food deserts. Describe a little bit about the food desert in this area.
Yeah, so it's what they define as a food desert is being a mile away from a grocery store, and that is almost amazing. I wish we were a mile away from a grocery store here, but we are 54 miles round trip to the nearest grocery store. And within 4 miles of our pueblo is 2 gas stations and a dollar store. So it's a lot of convenience food. And when people need food and you can't make the journey, or you're not able to make the journey even, it's going to be the gas station or it's going to be the dollar store. And those are the options that people have available. So we're just trying to, it's sad because most of New Mexico is rural, so most of New Mexico is in food desert, and we all face the same thing. And through plant-based foods and traditional foods, I believe that we can reverse the health disparities that we face in our community. I believe that we will be healthier, more in tune, well beings in our community. It'll ripple out, and I think the healthier that our tables become, the healthier our plates get, the healthier our minds will be, and the better our communities will be. I feel like nutrition has a big part of what we face and how to heal, and even on a cellular level. So I just want people to know that, you can make the changes. It's not too late in your journey, and you can always turn to plant food and turn to the earth, because she's our mother and she has the medicine for us. So food is medicine, and any steps are a step towards a better life. So that's what I want people to know and hopefully walk away from this with.
This is called The Fight, and I love being back here. I came to New Mexico for Indian boarding school and art school, the Institute of American Indian Arts. When it was in the old place with the old buildings, they went and tore down and upset all of us. and it was a BIA school there, and a Bureau of Indian Affairs school. And in our classrooms, in one of our classrooms, we still had those stoves up in the late 60s that were used to teach just a few classes before, to teach our young women how to clean houses for people here in Santa Fe. And we still had those farms, the old barns out back for teaching the young men dairy farming. Wasn't that long ago. It wasn't that long ago at all, but I've been, this place has really fed my whole vision, being in an incredible class with young Native artists from all over the country. And that started really, certainly feeding my vision, and our generational vision started way back with our ancestors and our people and the lands. But there it started coming together. And then later at the University of New Mexico Kiva Club, which was on the edge of thinking, okay, we're a community. We're not just Native students, but we're Native students who are a part of all these communities. And we were working for social justice, human rights, and that's part of our education. And the poetry came out of that. And I always associate my poetry voice for it. I came here, and it began and found its home here. But along the way, all of us as artists and human beings, we have our struggles. And as Native people, certainly you add struggles on top of that. And this is about that. And embedded in this, of course, is our traditional Muskogee system, but that would take a while to discuss. But it's in the poem. It's called The Fight. We all go through this fight, every human being in here. So when you look around at somebody and you're thinking they're better than you, or they've got it easier, or why didn't this happen to me, or you can't judge anybody else's life. Everybody else has this, everyone in here has their own struggles. Child, teenager, young man, old man, woman. The fight. The rising sun paints the feet of night-crawling enemies, and they scatter into the burning hills. I have fought each of them. I know them by name, from before I could speak. I've used every weapon to make them retreat, yet they return every night if I don't keep guard. They elbow through openings in faith, tear the premise of trust, and stick their shields through the doubt of smoke to challenge me. I grow tired of the heartache of every small and large war, passed from generation to generation. But it is not in me to give up. I was taught to give honor to the house of warriors, which cannot exist without the house of the peacemakers.
We've spent a lot of time this year on the show discussing New Mexico's complicated past and how that past is represented in controversial statues and monuments. One of the flashpoints for that controversy is often Juan de Oñate. The Spanish conquistador criticized for his brutal treatment of Native Americans, but he is also revered by some and memorialized in countless statues and monuments, which are now under new scrutiny. Earlier this fall, we talked with New Mexico native, now Arizona State professor, Vanessa Fonseca Chavez. She and correspondent Russell Contreras discussed her views on why and how the historical figures we choose to memorialize matter.
Dr. Fonseca Chavez, thank you for joining us here today on New Mexico in Focus.
Thanks for having me, Russ.
Before we get into your book, your current book and your future projects, tell me, what is it about your scholarship that attracts you to the contradictions of New Mexico's colonial past and what that tells us about today?
Yeah, so in my first chapter of my book, I talk about growing up in northwestern New Mexico and sort of living within these contradictions, growing up in an area where there are Hispanic and Anglo and Indigenous communities that, when you're younger, you don't really notice the different sort of contradictions or political leanings or, deeper histories, but you see those things enacted all around you. And so I think there was a point in my life where I started to have more sort of visceral responses to these things that were going on. And when I was in my master's program at UNM, it dawned on me that I was like, I want to study these legacies of colonialism. And a number of professors at UNM had told me that's overdone. We don't want to, we don't talk about that anymore. But one of the interesting things is that once I stepped outside of New Mexico and I went to Arizona State to do my PhD, it was a different sort of way of looking at your home space. So there's something about, like, if you're in New Mexico, you understand it and you live it and you get the contradictions, but when you step outside, it provides a different lens for you to look at what is going on in your home state.
Your book, Querencia, Reflections on New Mexico Homeland. Talk about how this book project came about after you became a scholar.
Yeah, so there was a few of us, Dulcinea Lara, Spencer Herrera, and Levi Romero. We had been doing this sort of conference circuit and we wanted to talk about New Mexico, but there were a lot of conference spaces. We were getting rejected from these conference spaces, from these like journal spaces, and we were just thinking like there needs to be a critical space to be able to discuss more emerging scholarship really on New Mexico. So we're really grateful to all of the scholars who have really put that work into place and provided us with some of the sort of conceptual and theoretical models for how to look at New Mexico in different ways. But we really wanted to think about, there's this huge group of people from New Mexico that some of them are leaving New Mexico, some of them are being trained in New Mexico, but we really wanted to talk about what this new generation of scholarship looks like. And so this came together actually at the Buffalo Thunder Resort in Santa Fe at the Rocky Mountain Modern Language Association conference. And so we all did a presentation there. And then following the conference, we're outside in the lobby and we're like, hey, we should do an edited book. And then that was the genesis of that project.
Now you're in Phoenix, Arizona. You grew up in Grants, New Mexico. What have you noticed looking at New Mexico as we are having this debate over monuments? Of course, we had a violent incident around a monument, Conquistador, in Albuquerque. And just recently, at the time of this interview, we had a monument taken down on Indigenous Day in Santa Fe Plaza. What has been your reaction to watching this?
So it's been interesting because I'm here in Mesa, Arizona, and I have a lot of friends who are directly involved in some of that activist work in New Mexico. And so when the protest was happening, it was being planned, I guess, in Alcalde and then also in Albuquerque, I was getting text messages and emails and Facebook messages from folks just sort of keeping me in the loop because they knew that this was part of the scholarship work that I had been doing. And so I'm really grateful because I know that sometimes it's hard to be out, well, not sometimes, all the time, it's hard to be away from New Mexico, especially when so much of the work that you're doing is in action. And so, part of it was thinking about, well, I can't physically be there, of course, because of COVID, because of travel restrictions, because that's not where I live right now. And so Esteban Rayal Galvez and I decided that we would, think about what we can do from a scholarship standpoint. And we put together an extended decolonial Oñate bibliography that has, different resources, archival, historical, literary, newspaper articles that had come out over the last, let's say 10 years about Oñate, so that anybody who wanted to learn more about that history could. And the idea was that people would start to really debunk or demystify this notion that Oñate is a founding father and a hero, because certainly in my scholarship and in Esteban's, that's not true.
In other states, Latinos in other states, Latinos, Chicanos, Hispanics, we always look at this idea that people in New Mexico venerate Oñate and other conquistador figures is somewhat odd. But why, from a New Mexico perspective, do these conquistadors, are they celebrated in New Mexico in this space? It seemed, yes, there are instances in other places, I'm thinking of the coastal area of California, where these colonial figures are honored. But why is Oñate such a celebrated figure in New Mexico when he's not in the rest of the American Southwest?
So, I mean, he has a lot to do with the founding of what people would say is Spanish New Mexico. And so folks that can trace their ancestry, and a lot of this was in large part to Fray Angelico Chavez's work on the founding families of New Mexico. But even Fray Angelico Chavez states that of all of the colonists that came with Oñate, very few stayed. So the notion that one could trace themselves back to Oñate, it's pretty slim. But then they also count Don Diego de Vargas as a second sort of founding father of New Mexico, and people can trace their ancestry back to that. So a lot of it has to do with the way that we can trace our ancestry back to, you know, what, like I said, people would say our founding fathers of New Mexico. But that line, it's not a straight line, right? So we have to think about the more complicated history, colonial violence, settler colonial violence, genocide against indigenous people. And for some reason, there are a lot of folks who, if they are able to trace their ancestry to Spain or to those original settlers, they will sort of sidestep or excuse the violent past and say, well, we have to think about what he did, and we have to think about, you know, where would we be if he hadn't come, right? And of course, within like a colonial model, this whole conversation about the what ifs is really, it's unproductive because it doesn't give us where we are now. It doesn't tell us where we are now. So of course, what ifs are good for the future, right? What if we can imagine a different kind of future? We can't imagine a different kind of past. That past is what it was, but we have to be honest about what that past was.
And how does the struggle for statehood play in this? We know that some scholarship has touched upon the idea of pura sangria, the eugenics movement at the time, and it's the racism from the turn of the century. Does that play a role in the current Spanish conquistador identity that is prevalent in New Mexico today?
Of course, and this doesn't apply to all Hispanics, you know, across New Mexico. So I'm talking about, you know, certain segments of it, but we know that New Mexico became a state in 1912, but that New Mexico experienced the longest period of was a territory longer than any other, you know, state in the US. And part of that has to do with like very racialized like politics that deal with, again, directly that idea of subjecting the other to these notions of being anti-Protestant, anti-English speaking. I mean, there were indigenous, mestizo, dark-skinned individuals in New Mexico. That wasn't really like the idea for the formation of the United States at the time. So a lot of the protests came because we spoke Spanish, we were Catholics, and we were brown, and we were poor. And that wasn't something that the US determined to be the ideal for the formation of the nation. So, and you saw that from newspapers as far as the Midwest, you saw it in the East Coast. So there were a lot of individuals who were not supportive of New Mexico's vie for statehood. And so some of the strategies that New Mexicans employed at that time was to show that they were also European, right? So if they descended from Spanish conquistadores, then they also were European. So they advocated for this sort of shared heritage with Euro-American settlers. And so it's interesting just to kind of see how much of that, and if we think about, again, like this idea of legacy, how much of that continues to today. So people will, they will say that they are Spanish American. The census doesn't do us any justice because people get very confused about, even if you identify as Hispanic, your racial category is white, and that's confusing for some people to identify as both Spanish and white. So I think in a lot of ways, the census perpetuates those identities. But yeah, that was very much sort of a social strategy. It didn't mean that they were actually white. It meant that it was a social strategy.
You mentioned the social strategy. Italian Americans used Christopher Columbus to battle discrimination, kind of put themselves in the American narrative. Was that also going on with New Mexico Hispanics to say, look, we are connected to the narrative of this land, and therefore we don't deserve discrimination, segregation, subjugation, that it was a strategy to try to insert themselves in the narrative? Is that what also is going on?
Yeah, so I've not heard that particular narrative. And I think part of that can only be premised on, if the United States as a nation recognizes prior colonial periods, then that could be a narrative, but they don't. So the whole idea for colonization is to wipe out any existing communities that were here before the United States colonial period started, right? So we know that with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, there were certain agreements that were made between the United States and the then 100,000 individuals who elected to become U.S. citizens at the end of the Mexican-American War. But, we also know that the Chicano movement made, the larger public aware that those treaty rights were not honored. And we know that the U.S. has a long history of not honoring treaties. And so I think it's all, it's a strategy certainly that, early Spanish Americans used in literature in the, first part of the 20th century. But I don't think it was something that the U.S. as a nation signed off on.
Now, as we're having these racial conciliation conversations, and Albuquerque's been included, some Hispanics who have supported the monuments say they're offended that they're being attacked, and they see this as an attack on their heritage because they can trace their lineage back decades, if not centuries. What's your reaction to them to say that, hey, look, this is my family you're attacking. This is my heritage. This is something that I've been taught throughout my life, and now you're attacking it. What is the response to that?
Yeah, I wonder to the extent, like, what have we been taught, growing up about our heritage and also about our shared heritages, right? So, in New Mexico, we have multiple heritages that exist and sometimes coexist and sometimes don't coexist. And, one of those conversations that comes to mind is in 2008 when The Last Conquistador was filmed. It's a documentary by John Valadez and Cristina Ibarra, but they were talking about the largest equestrian statue in the world, which is in El Paso. And that is, it's named the equestrian, but people know it as Oñate because that was, it was a compromise by the El Paso City Council to name it something else, right? And that was sort of an effort to sidestep the fact that they did want to put up an Oñate statue. But the idea for that, one of the individuals in there, Conchita Lucero, had commented that this will finally be an unveiling of our history. And that documentary starts with her narrating that when she grew up, she didn't have an opportunity to learn about her Spanish American history. So it's interesting to see how her sort of argument parallels the same sort of arguments that indigenous communities or even Chicanx communities might make in terms of not being able to have access to their history, right? So the narrative is the same, but the results are sort of different, right? Because one exerts more power over another. It's difficult because these are all, basically ethnic communities. But what happens in New Mexico when these ethnic communities start pitting themselves against each other? In New Mexico, certainly it looks like people who identify as Spanish American tend to exert some amount of superiority over people who are more mixed blood or who are indigenous. And that, again, is a social construct, a social hierarchy construct, certainly not based on race, because we know that the settlers that came with Oñate were mestizos and mixed race individuals. So they weren't all pure-blooded Spaniards either. You talked a little bit earlier about the pureza de sangre notion. So they weren't that when they arrived. And so it's just interesting for them to sort of link onto this notion of being Spanish American. Now, I will say that, the Spanish colonial period was long lasting. It was more than 300 years. And so there is scholarship that shows that people tend to affix themselves to a country that has controlled this area the longest, right? So people feel an affinity toward the Spanish colonial period because in comparison to the US colonial period, the Spanish colonial period has been twice as long. And so people tend to adhere to a culture that was in formation for 300 years, right? So it's sort of like we're still adjusting. A lot of the authors from New Mexico in the early 1900s, like I mentioned, were really having a hard time grappling with the idea that their culture could be erased, right? And that was a real possibility for, especially when, modernity arrived to New Mexico and Americanization efforts were in full force. And so there's a lot of, obviously, since at least, the mid 1800s, people have been contesting this notion of cultural erasure.
Now, a number of cities across the country have convened racial healing councils, task force to talk about systemic racism and various monuments, whether they're Confederate or Spanish conquistador monuments. Albuquerque is one of them. What has been your reaction to the attempt to convene a committee of community members to have this conversation? is this helpful? Will this decide what we can do with these monuments? Or is this a Band-Aid to circumvent very difficult discussions we need to be having?
I think it's a laudable goal to, ask people to participate in conversations where we really take a deep look at our heritage, the biases that we carry with us, the different kinds of privileges that we exert at one time or another. I know that folks in the city of Albuquerque did do the Race, Healing, and Memory Project. I don't know if that's the correct name, but so they did do a project, and it was convened over the summertime, and there were different focus groups. And I participated in one of them. I didn't participate in the follow-up sessions. And I think that for a lot of folks who have been doing this activist work and scholarship for a long time, it feels like a frustrating pause in the process to sit and have to do that work when they feel like they've done that work and they're ready for action. And I think that the resulting, toppling of the obelisk, for example, it's a prime example of the way that people, they've waited. And, the mayor of Santa Fe did, say that something was to be done about the obelisk. When they saw that in action, then they reacted to that. And I think that that's, the big thing in New Mexico is that folks are done waiting for justice. And it's a hard thing to wait for. And it's a hard line of promises to not deliver upon.
And finally, I've asked you this before, but if these statues were removed, what should replace those spaces?
Yeah, so I think this is a question going around, what are we going to do with these things? I don't know that we even have to replace it with anything. I don't know that we take something down, whether we decide to put them in museums, whether we decide to melt it down and hand out, pieces to individuals. I don't know that there actually has to be a conversation about what should go here instead. I don't see it unreasonable to take them down, and that can be the end of the conversation. Now, I know people have talked about, we should have statues that pay honor to other individuals within New Mexico. Of course, Popeye has been, talked about quite often, and we do have some statues of Popeye in New Mexico and at the nation's capital. But I also want to recognize that Indigenous women have been at the forefront of most of these activist efforts in the community, and no one, from what I've heard so far, is talking about honoring Indigenous women at this moment through statues. So that's a possibility. But then also, within my larger work, I'm always advocating for can we stop talking about this sort of hero, founding father notion? Do people have to be statues do people get to be statues because they're heroes? Or can we talk about just community members who have done, it takes a lot to survive and thrive, and especially through colonial processes and traumas. And, if we can honor people in that way, I think that that's pretty exceptional as well.
The name of Vanessa's book is Querencia, Reflections on New Mexico Homeland. Thank you, Vanessa, for joining us, and we appreciate you coming. We look forward to you coming back soon.
Thanks, Russ.
Before we wrap up this week, we want to share another poetry reading from National Poet Laureate Joy Harjo. And news just broke that she's been appointed for a third term starting in September of 2021. Congratulations. We feel like this poem is especially poignant as it exemplifies and challenges the sense of loss that 2020 has forced on us all. But it also carries a message of the importance of perseverance and always moving forward. Here again, Joy Harjo.
And we're all here for just a little time. You may not think that when you're young, but as you get older, I know that there's some kind of equation that will tell you how time shifts, in relationship to your age. Because we all remember being very young and how one day was an eternity. Being called in from the eternity of outside as a little kid from playing was, destroying. It was, horrible. And nowadays and it gets faster and faster. But life is still precious all the way. And in that equation, you would also see that the story doesn't begin when you're born. It begins way before your birth. And it doesn't end when you leave. It just keeps going. And I think when you come into this world, that. When you spend time with newborns, they come in, they still have the whole story. They still remember the story. And they will tell you that story. And I've noticed that usually somebody comes in with every child. It's usually somebody, your relatives, somebody who's come in as a caretaker. And when we leave, they're there to greet us, and the story continues. For Shan, first morning. This is the first morning we are without you on earth. The sun greeted us after a week of rain in your eastern green and mountain homelands. Plants are fed, the river restored, and you have been woven into a path of embracing stars of all colors, now free of the suffering that shapes us here. We all learn to let go, like learning how to walk when we first arrive here. All those you thought you lost now circle you, and you are free of pain and heartbreak. Don't look back, keep going. We will carry your memory here until we join you in just a little while, in one blink of star time.
As with most things this year, this holiday weekend is not what any of us planned. I'm sure we are all suffering from bouts of isolation, anxiety, and depression, and that's completely normal. It's yet another blow this year that we need to keep our distance from those who would comfort us most, and that would be family and friends. But maybe also look at this as an opportunity to find new ways of reaching out. Maybe start some new traditions. And of course, keep our eyes and hearts focused on making 2021 a better, safer, and healthier year. From all of us at New Mexico in Focus, I thank you for watching, for engaging, and for most of all, caring. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation and viewers like you.